physical in nature, was it not? I mean, David found himself physically in the land of the Philistines, having fled Israel, having fled Jerusalem because of Saul. And he was in exile, physically. He was separated from his kingdom. And much of what David is praising God for is physical in nature. Now, I'm not saying there was not a spiritual dimension there, because clearly David gives all the glory to God for what has been done. But what he's basically doing is praising God for physical deliverance, for physical life. The fact that he didn't die. The fact that Abimelech did not look at him and say, "You're faking, buddy," and nail his hide to the wall. Literally, which is what they did to kings. Excuse me. So he clearly attributed everything that was done in this psalm to God. But in the opening explanation that David gave in Psalm 34, we see very clearly what his purpose was. He said, "This is because I escaped physical death in the court of Abimelech." If we look back at the opening, it says of David when he changed his behavior before Abimelech so that he drove him out and he went away. So in other words, this is very clearly a psalm that has a very physical nature to it. Notice also in 34:16 what it is that David says. He says, "The face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth." So again, you see this physical nature. Now, we could do a little work there on that verse as well. It's pretty interesting. I even saw Jimmy kind of grin back there. He kind of caught what's going on here. Now, as we come down to the Jews, the diaspora Jews, we also see somewhat of the same thing. They were looking for that same physical deliverance. What was their hope? Their hope was that they would be able to return where? Say it louder, Carl. Jerusalem. Yeah, the promised land. Out from underneath the Greco, which was going to become the Greco-Roman Empire. In fact, we see that so clearly during the intertestamental period with the Hasmonean revolt, when basically the ruling group of Israel threw off the bonds and the bounds of Rome, and of course paid for it dearly in 70 AD when Rome finally came back in and annihilated Jerusalem and once again carried the children of Israel back off into captivity for their uprising. That's what actually started the whole zealot movement, which Simon the Zealot, if you remember, Simon was a part of. It was this idea of trying to throw off the bonds of Rome, the bonds of the Greco-Roman Empire. By the way, it's interesting that it was at this same time that the Sadducees developed. You know, the class of rabbis and priests, the Sadducee party. Do you remember what they were known for? They didn't believe in what? Resurrection. You see, in their mind, the mind of that day for the Jewish nation, for the most part, it was a physical issue. Their belief and understanding was that this physical land was the issue. That was their great hope. That was their great promise. So both with David and with the diaspora Jews, this psalm was directed, it was worded in such a way that the focus was on the physical. Now, when we move into 1 Peter, we begin to see something a little bit different. In fact, let me back up a little bit here in Psalm 34:12. "What man is there who desires life and loves many days, that he may see good?" Now, what is it that this man loves in this passage? Many days. When you hear this term, loves many days, what are we thinking of? Long life. Do you see the physical nature of this? Now, Peter's modification of the wording of Psalm 34 brings the focus not on the length of days. In fact, if you go back and look at how Peter words Psalm 34, when he quotes it in 1 Peter chapter 3, he doesn't say anything about many days. He begins to talk about good days. In other words, he's moved past the physical. He's not worried about the many. Why? Because the people of God are already in an eternal kingdom. They're not worried about many days. That's not an issue. However, they are in eternal kingdom, but they are still finding themselves as exiles in a foreign pagan country. So what are the people of God concerned with? Good days, living righteously, proper conduct. So Peter then, his slight modification of the wording of Psalm 34 brings the focus not on the length of days, but on the goodness of days, or the blessing of God found in the righteous living of the eternal child of the kingdom described in verses 8 and 9. You see, he's already introduced the idea that we are now in this eternal kingdom, so length of days becomes basically meaningless at that point. Does it not? You know, we still think in terms of this physical world we're in, but if we could really transform our minds to the point that we thought continually in terms of eternity, how many of us would be concerned about how many days are left? We wouldn't be. It would have no bearing on anything. You see, he's shifted from amount to quality, to how to live rightly. You see, he's begun to stretch this Old Testament passage to a new, a greater, a bigger, a higher capacity meaning. And I submit to you that what he is really doing is bringing us into a proper understanding of the original intent that God had when that Psalm 34 was penned to begin with. So he takes the passage, and the passage begins to take on an added dimension of quality of life, and it gives it a broader and a greater application than its Old Testament understanding. So if we could understand then what Peter is saying when he uses Psalm 34, maybe we could say it this way. In Peter's context, the quotation of Psalm 34 is a strong reminder that the true kingdom child and citizen does not live and respond as the world around him. He pursues peace, he answers evil and reviling with blessing, and he ever seeks the will of, it should be his King and Father, if I'm going to have subject-verb agreement there. So do you see what Peter's done with this passage? The meaning has not changed, but it's grown. It's filled out. It has a fullness that it did not have before. And it begins to address us in the state that we are in as children of this eternal kingdom. Now, let me say something here. Some of you may look at that and say, well, that's how I understood it to begin with. I hope you did. You see, a lot of times as children of God, we already intuitively see a lot of these Old Testament quotations in light of a New Testament understanding. What we don't realize many times is that if we had put ourselves back in that Old Testament context, we would not have seen it that way. We would have seen it in a different light.